Thanks, Janet. And yeah, it's my delight to introduce Biff. But before I do want to just acknowledge Janet and all the work that she's done, and the other directors, Lynn and Kirsten in particular, and welcome Alison. So on to introducing Biff. Biff featured in the recent documentary Brazen Hussies that celebrates social activism and grassroots nature of women's liberation movement in the 60s and 70s. I had the honour of having a chat with Biff the other day and asked her for a couple of events that sort of stood out in her long career of feminist activism. And she said there were two things: her book that she wrote, Father-Daughter Rape, and the 1983 Pine Gap Peace Vigil. Her book was one of the first in the world in the topic around the topic of incest and rape. And she said that she thought strategically about what would actually unite women and come together. And it was the issue of rape. Almost everyone knows somebody who's been sexually assaulted or raped. And she spoke of the gradation from right to brutal rape. And after 50 years of activism, she's still at it. And this year, Biff was a speaker at the March for Justice rally here in Canberra, and we still have a long, long way to go. The other event she spoke about was Pine Gap, and some of you may remember Pine Gap, where there was a 2-week vigil in November 1983, where up to 800 women from all walks of life and all around Australia attended the Joint Defence Space Research Facility at Pine Gap, just outside Alice Springs, to bring public attention to the secrecy of the US base and Australia's vulnerability as a nuclear target. Now it was November, hot, no showers, no toilets, and the Women for Survival felt that the base at Pine Gap symbolised global violence, being part of the continuum of violence against women and children, systematically embedded in patriarchy and imperialism. It was organised around the principles of collectivity, consensus and collaboration. And it was a particularly creative culture, using dance, song, theatre, silence, tea parties, balloon releases, workshops and speeches. And it sounds a lot like the Women's Climate Congress. And on November the 13th, 1983, women scrambled over the fence and held a Boston Tea Party on the green lawns of the base. When they began walking to the buildings, there were 111 women were arrested for trespass, each giving their name as Karen Silkwood, an important anti-nuclear campaigner. The Peace Camp gave attention nationally and internationally, particularly the mass arrests, and complaints of police mistreatment were made around the arrests, and a human rights inquiry followed. So Biff is indeed a brazen hussy. So let's make welcome Biff. So over to you, Biff.
Key moment. Yeah. I forgot to unmute. Thank you, Barbara. So I just want to mention the beautiful Ngambri and Ngunnawal land again here in Canberra that I'm lucky enough to live on. I thought I feel like I'm not an after dinner type speaker, and I'm going to. I've got a screen in front of me. Thing anyway.
You're fine for yeah.
Yeah, no, across my face for myself just looks odd. I've got a bit of a grab bag of a few ideas, and I wanted to start with a poem which I wrote in the 1980s, and I'm thrilled to hear how aware of the power of the arts the Congress is. And this was playing with the feminist idea about the moon being female and what that meant. So it's called The Fault Line. If I catastrophize all day, it doesn't mean I'm mad. After all, there's a nuclear reactor on the San Andreas Fault. There's worms mutated from the slime of poisons, to say nothing of the world's leaders making apocryphal decisions in 3-tiered vaults for bulletproof worthiness. And since I'm on the lunatic fringe, I may as well dance with the moon, because the sun has taught us all we need to know about daytime power and grow, 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 while the silver lady of the night has gleamed through centuries in lonely waiting. So I've just recently rediscovered this book that some friends and I did, and I thought, oh, that's a good poem, and it seemed to fit for today. The first thing I was going to say in terms of rememberings and of women's liberation, which started here in Canberra in 1970, Sydney 69, and it's a kind of learning, is that what we actually did was step outside the male paradigm, which ran the whole world. And that was incredibly scary and completely exhilarating at the same time. It terrified others. We all lost very close friends, people who just freaked out and didn't want to know us anymore. Most have come back into the fold. There were a few decades there when that was the case. And the other thing with reflection and hindsight now we realise is that we thought we were original. We thought we were the first ones. And then, of course, we started to remember the suffragettes and do the research and read the books and so on. But it shows how women's moments of power and time in the light can be obliterated, because my generation grew up pretty much vaguely rubbishing the suffragettes. They were embarrassing, they were blue stockings, they wore bloomers, they were strange. And then we became very strange ourselves. The second thing I wanted to mention was how through all the personal talking we did, which was really how it all started, because there were virtually no books in the beginning, we discovered the personal is political, that famous phrase. And out of that, and the issues we were looking at, language got created. And that's incredibly important. You can't talk about something unless you have the language. So the word sexism was created in that period. I'll just tell a little story here. My friend Julia Ryan says that when she first used that word in the major mass staff room at Tilapia Park High School, where she was teaching, she used the word sexism just to a few people. The first time she knew she'd used it, the whole room went silent, even people quite a long way away. And she said it was really funny because people were clearly going, what's she talking about? Is that something to do with sex? Like they didn't, it was a new word, a completely new word. Sexual harassment, and I just thought I'd mention how some of you probably remember this, but in the 80s, when this word first, thanks to Susan Ryan's Sex Discrimination Act, this phrase first really hit the deck, for about 20 years, it was extremely common for only men, sometimes women, to joke, I wish I could get harassed, because it was the word sex that set them off, but not listening to what we were really talking about. And the form of resistance, just there always. And with domestic violence, you'd get comments about, yes, but women nag, don't they? They talk, you know, it's their own fault. I wanted to just say here that because I'm maybe a writer too, I'm really interested in this thing of language. And I've noticed in my membership of Extinction Rebellion that there's sometimes moments where climate change is used when really we're talking about climate activism, not climate change. Climate change is the problem. And I'm wondering if the Congress can find some phrase for what you're really on about. And I came up with women's wisdom or something, or climate solutions, or anyway, I just think it's an area that I'm focused on, I'm interested in. The next point I was going to make, you've already covered, which was in part, so the suffragettes got the vote, got us into the society by the tips of our fingernails. Women's liberation, I think, identified a lot of the issues and created language. And also saw that liberation was not about individuals, you know, oh, she's very liberated, are you liberated? It's completely ridiculous, nothing to do with it. And we held that no woman is liberated until every woman in the world is free of this thing called sexism. So the issue is actually ending sexism. And I liked how you talked about changing the paradigm in the systems that run us, but there's still underlying that is changing the culture so people's heads can allow that systemic change to happen. What we did, and I loved hearing that last bit about operating in circles and inclusion, because what women's liberation originally did was have a determination to behave differently from the male left, which is where we mostly came from. And so we had a big thing about no stars, often if we spoke in public, not even using our names, around collective thinking, and a principle that the means is the end, which of course is the lesson of all the great political revolutions that end up in violence, because they're created in violence. So how you do something, how you head for your goal is in fact the key. It's part of everything that you're on about, and certainly part of the ending. And my final point, I think, is that somewhere in your writings, I saw the reference to the force of women being together, and which I took to mean the power, that feeling of great power and a big force behind it for action. I think that when women get together in groups with awareness of why they're there, there's many women's groups who are completely not feminist, of course, but when you come with that awareness, the power resides in that initial fact where I started, that you have stepped outside the male paradigm, the dominant culture, and we are by definition separate from the dominant culture. And that gives us, again, it's scary but exhilarating, but it gives us a great power, because we can stand aside and see in a way that the people who are the dominant culture can't see. I might just tell a little story here. A few weeks ago, I was picking up my teenage granddaughter to take her to school, and I was trying to tell her some quite complicated story I just heard on the radio about how a man was led to see that he didn't have so many rights to speak about sexual predations. And my granddaughter just interrupted me and said, "No uterus, no opinion." I said, "So there's nothing I can teach you here?" And she said, "No." So that's that, you know, standing outside, being very clear. And I think the key to this standing outside and being filled perhaps with rage and grief and so on, that drives us, is to come out the other side, still with your rage and grief, but able to operate as fully human in any setting. And by that, I mean, when we carry our rage and we're just being angry, it's not effective, as you would know, or our grief. And it's something about being able to hold all that and operate in a completely rational way. And I thought of the famous Julia Gillard speech, 9th of October 2012, because I think that's why her speech blazed that feminist path around the world. She was really holding her rage and letting it be seen, but she was absolutely grounded in herself and completely rational in what she did. And finally, I just wanted to say on the big women's rally, I used the Susan Griffin line, which I love. There is a world without rape because this world is in our minds. And I think, I get the impression, the Women's Climate Congress is operating on a similar vision. We can see the world beyond climate change when all is rational and shared and sustainable. And that's what we can hold to. And not be talked out of, because we can see it. So that's all I'm going to say right now, but I really look forward to questions.
Thanks very much, Biff, for your everything you've done. And the questions from here. What of your actions do you think have had most traction over the years? So what in particular sort of had the most traction to make change?
Well, I think we, the Brazen Hussy generation, I think that creation of language, and so that's international. Some of those words came from America or England or Australia. No one knows. But I think the fact that we weren't, I mean, this wasn't strategically worked out, but we were not a single issue movement like the suffragettes. And it's now pretty well accepted, I think, by the historians that that's why that movement so died away, even though there were women trying to carry it on and do the whole cultural thing. It died away once there was that degree of achievement that there was. And women's liberation was not like that. What I meant to say something about was equality. Like what women's liberation was very clear that we wanted to end sexism, and that would be good for men and children too. It would be good for everyone to get rid of this system of sexism and this way of thinking about people. What the press did with that 2 or 3 years later, when Wells started to be, instead of just laughing at us, they started to use the word equality. These women are about equality, rather than just completely laughing at us. And for women's liberation, that was not true. And I still, to this day, I don't like the word equality. We used to have a saying about equal to what? Meaning, like which man? And we used to say, I was going to aim a little higher myself. To me, equality, of course, we want equal pay and to be able to go to the pub and all of those things, but it's a strategy. It's a way of raising awareness about unfairness and bringing people on board and getting more fairness, but it doesn't undo the entire culture and the way of thinking. That's a much longer and deeper battle, in my opinion. And I think that language really helped. And so we've waited, let's say we were active, really active all through the 70s and some in the 80s, but there was a way in which our activism started to wane and we were all tired and we were all off in different areas and so on. For a period, there wasn't even a movement as such. But the way it's flowered in the last 4 or 5 years around sexual predation all around the world, I think is based on the concepts that the 70s generation created. Yeah.
I think that was an amazing time, and certainly I think then there was sort of a bit of a result and pushback about language and the use of pronouns like chair and rather than chairman, etc., etc.
I mean, really, that just highlights that minutiae of the change and the magnitude. Like it's everything. And it, yeah.
Got a question from Janet. When you made the Brazen Hussies, did you reflect back on how things have played out since then?
Yeah, the person who made the Brazen Hussies was Catherine Dwyer, this younger woman from Melbourne. She was just extraordinary. Like many of the others, had been approached over the last 10 years or so by quite a few people doing research or theses or wanting to talk about various things we'd done. And my experience was they were usually, they were just one topic, quite limited or general. Some of them were very prepared, some weren't. So this film, and they were coming to my house, I just thought I was just another one of these things. I didn't take it very seriously. And this film crew of 5 professional women turned up, and they took an hour and a half just to get the room ready, hanging black things and white things and cords and so on. They were very professional. And then when it started was realising that Catherine, the director, had done the most extraordinary amount of research she would say things like, Biff, in 1971, you wrote bloody blah. I'd say, did I? Where? What is that? So the actual filming was a process of reflecting on, you know, what we'd done and the changes since then and things, but it wasn't like a group project or anything. They went to each person and spent that sort of time. But what I'll just tell you all, in case anyone's interested, what it does mean is there's this huge archive somewhere, because Catherine spent between an hour and a half and 3 hours interviewing every person and only used seconds. So there's this incredible archive based on her amazingly deep research that'll be available forevermore. Mm.
We've got a couple more questions. One from Alex Marsden. Belittling is still such a powerful weapon against women. What are your organisational strategies to deal with this?
I don't know about organisational, but just a couple of thoughts. I haven't got the paper here, but I once did a talk a year or two ago about how the suffragettes and women's liberation and the young women now were connected. And all I did was talk about the names they were called in the different periods. And it's just one of the main weapons that I use to silence us, because it's horrible to be called names and be humiliated. I'm not very good at the quick rejoinders and being funny, but they're good. They're very good. Actually, that reminds me of one that happened this week. This same teacher friend was remembering how the first time she's heard in a staff room a man complaining that all the women jobs were being taken by women now and it wasn't fair. She said, just came out, she didn't plan it. She just said, oh, if only that were true. So, you know, I don't have any magic answers, but I think claiming it, I mean, often claiming language. Yes, we're bitches, you know, or whatever. Turning it back on them.
Yes, I guess I've always struggled with the C word because there's no sort of male equivalent to that.
There's not.
No, and I find it quite challenging.
It was used at a funeral last week of a leading feminist in a really good way. I won't go into that story.
Yeah. Okay, so another question from Gil King. Women's ways are so important for life-affirming future. Inclusiveness is a big feature. Where do you see feminine identifying and non-binary people fit into the women's movement, like Women's Lib and Women's Climate Congress?
When women's liberation, in the early days of women's liberation, the idea of getting rid of sex roles, which we talked about all the time, just opened this door to a multiplicity of ways of being in terms of what we call sex roles. And apart from the rise of gay liberation and lesbian life and so on, that kind of faded away. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I was asked to help with a group here called Gender Agenda, which was about, and it was just before it became everywhere, about gender diverse people and of all sorts. And I spent a weekend with them, and it was what we had dreamed of, that there would be all, not two boxes, not just maleness and femaleness, everything is possible. And I think the more that we can all move to that position and think about that and embrace it, then there will be true welcome everywhere. And there won't be anyone who's in the sort of leading role or the leading power, which heterosexual people absolutely are still now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that inclusiveness is so important. And now we've got a question from Honey. Over your long activist career, have you seen a change towards recognising First Nations first law, embraced by more women and men, i.e. that the earth gave birth and protection and provision to all life? Our primary task is to reciprocally care for the earth and all its life, all her life.
I often, over the years, have seen parallels between the women's movement and the Indigenous movement. And right now, I thought of it particularly around that issue of equality and so on, that there's still this huge issue, and today it's all about Wilcannia, you know, the incredible lack of equality of safe lives, of housing and jobs and education and health. But I also, at the same time, what I see happening right now is the incredible generosity of the Indigenous movement over the last, well, it's probably 40 years, but really speeding up in the last 5 and 10 years around sharing their culture, bringing us into what has been secret or invisible to the white fellas like me for forever. And I think Lyndall Ryan's massacre map, if you don't know about that, go and look at it. Incredible piece of work. And her discovery that every single Indigenous community in Australia has stories of massacres, like it's come down the 10 generations or whatever. And the widespread acceptance now about, what do they call it? Cool burning, how to burn off, how to look after the land in that way. Absolutely, I think the Indigenous movement is teaching us, and the more that happens, the better off we will all be. But it requires complete humility from us to realise how blind we've been, but just to learn. Yeah. And I do see a meeting of the women's movement and the Indigenous movement there, of course.
Can I make a comment there, Barb? Just very,
Yes.
just because I was just it just raised something in me when you talked about the blindness there, because it comes in layers. Like, as a community, we have been blind to Indigenous knowledge, and it seemed incomprehensible that we wouldn't have learned and taken that knowledge, that we've pushed it away and that we've been blind to it. But on another level, maybe men are actually blind to women's knowledge.
Absolutely.
And it's the same thing. It's just another step in that, we're all blind to Indigenous knowledge, so we can open up these frontiers of knowledge and all work together somehow.
I'm sure time's up, but can I just throw in one more?
Yeah, we've got a little more time.
Okay. I've noticed in the last 15 years or so, as this Indigenous opening up has happened so much, that I often hear people speaking as though they've always known what they now know. And I find it quite important to acknowledge that I didn't, that I was really ignorant for a very long time. And that, it's about, because I'm so interested in the process of change, and I like to be really honest about it, and not just want to look like I'm really groovy and I've always known, like to see these things take time and how do they happen. And a lot of it happens from storytelling and revealing painful things for women and for Indigenous people, gay people. And just, I hope that's clear. Yeah.
One more question. We still have a few minutes, so one more question from Kirsten. When there are women in the majority of the decision-making bodies, do we need to start insisting on equal representation of both men and women? But I think we've got a way to go.
Really like, how Jane Caro can be quite cheeky. I heard her say once that she hasn't got any time for equality until, she said, men have run the world for 2,000 years at least that we know of. They've had all the power and all the everything. When women have run it for 2,000 years, then I'll talk.
So I saw her say that. That was quite amazing.
And of course, I don't mean that absolutely, but there's a lot of ground to make up if ever we move to women really getting power.
Yeah. And so just a question from me, like in terms of your thinking strategically about bringing women together in terms of addressing sexual harassment, are there suggestions that, we could use as a Women's Climate Congress to actually move forward in terms of, raising women's voices, the cultural change, and engaging people on both sides, because we need everybody in the tent, so we need to be really inclusive. So are there any sort of strategies that you could think of that may help us on the journey?
Some of you may have heard this story. Glenda Clockley told me years ago of she was invited to speak to I think it was a national gathering of climate scientists, probably even 18, 20 years ago here in Canberra. And she was asked to speak to them. And she was talking about the emotional part of the work they did, which of course was something the mostly men in the room didn't do at all. And as I remember it, she said in the end, a large number of them were crying. So, I mean, that's one bit of it, but to me, it's about, a big part of it is back to the personal is political. And when you go there, it's like, how are you feeling about this? What's really going on for you underneath your work? And I would be, keen for women in the Congress to do that, and then work out how you take that out to others, how you engage. Because when people connect emotionally, the head follows. It doesn't always happen the other way at all. And emotions are what drives all those male politicians who thump the table and say they're rational. Like,
Okay.
I don't know if that's enough of an answer, Barbara.
Well, I think it's very valuable, because sometimes we sweep over the emotions because, again, a male way is, straight down the line. And I think that's been one of the wonderful things with the Congress, is actually continually pulling back to the women's ways and the circles and the thinking, and it's been such a joy to be involved with this for so long. But I'm going to hand back to, I don't think there's any more questions, but there's been some wonderful comments in the chat saying thank you to you, Biff, and mentioning the Uluru Statement. Joanne's put the map up of the colonial massacres, so just check them out. There's some wonderful things there as well. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to you, Janet. And thank you.
Actually, sorry, Janet, Sarah and Jan had their hands up. Did they want to say something?
I've just actually put you all on gallery view, and just so that we can all, just for a minute, I can see you all, and we can perhaps all, have a little wave. And we do have a couple of minutes to spare. So if Sarah, who was it? Sarah and Jan want to maybe just make your own comment online now while we're on gallery view. I can't see it from that, Sarah. You must be on the next screen.
Sarah said her hand was accidentally up.
Oh, her hand was accidentally. Well, would anyone, while we're on gallery view here for 5 minutes, would anyone like to make a comment? Don't be shy. We've got Zol. Hello, Zol. Nice to meet you. There.
Hello. I just want to say to Biff, thank you so very much. That was just so extraordinarily beautiful to the soul, and made a lot of sense in my ears. And you just bet me to the Brazen Hussies. And I acknowledge your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Zol. It's wonderful to see you. Make me teary.
I shall be in touch.
Anybody else got a...
Zol lived at Greenham Common for years. So.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I saw that on your
story.
Marvellous.
Can I just say thank you, Biff? Alex Marsden here. I took notes because they were really, really lovely pearls of wisdom that you dropped, and I appreciate it very much. I was 17 when I first went to Adelaide Uni, and came, in the mid-70s, and it was such a joyous time for me, and I was so lucky to actually grow up with all the wonderful things that Women's League did for us in the late 60s, early 70s. It shaped my entire life and the way I worked through life, and I've just been very, very blessed, and it was lovely listening to you today. So thank you.
Tell you, I'm currently, I'll probably never finish it, but I'm trying to write a novel about a bunch of Brazen Hussies. And if they It's based in Adelaide, so I'm creating all these scenes at Adelaide Uni where I didn't go.
Oh.
Me and myself and a couple of friends, we actually formed a singing group called Raging Matilda, and we were
Oh.
at the first Claim the Night March. Raging Matilda.
And your name's Alex Marsden?
Yes, indeed.
I might get in touch, Alex. Are you still in Adelaide?
No, I'm in Canberra, Ngunnawal country.
Oh, great.
So, I'll tell you what, I'll put my email in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Networking extraordinaire, that's what us women do. So any other comments?
One.
Yeah.
I've got one. So
Yeah,
am I allowed?
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I may be wrong in this, but I've got a sense that maybe things could be going on for women in the Climate Congress, for some. So one is the issue of saving the earth and what you're trying to do, which is fabulous, and all the expertise you've got. The other is that when women come together in aware groups that are separate from the dominant paradigm, there's often a lot of personal change happens and stuff going on for people. And I just want to acknowledge that that's not always easy. It was easy for us because it was our only focus at first, you know, it was fabulous. But when you're trying to do something else and you're near to tears and it may not be the right moment to talk about it or whatever, I just want to acknowledge that there could be hard moments and to look after each other.
Thank you, Biff. Thank you. Yeah. Is anybody, maybe we'll take one more comment if there is one, otherwise.
Janet, I just wanted to say that in the chat, there's a few things about this is the best AGM ever. So there.
And I also saw an earlier comment that said it was the best annual report ever. So, so we seem to have we've ticked a few boxes here today. Women, we're on to something. So
I've just got a quick question, Janet, about Biff's name. It's just fabulous. I love it. Is it a nickname that was given to you in the movement?
No. My parents didn't like any of the shortenings. They had a Lib and a Bess and a Betty in the family already.
Are you Elizabeth?
So they tried to make my little brother say Elizabeth. So I've been called Elizabeth Biff all my life. He said,
Perfect. And I love this, how language shapes what happens for us.
Yeah. Great question. Thanks, Jane, because I've been wondering that too. So it just remains for me to thank Biff very much for her wonderful wisdom that she has brought to us. And I certainly felt I was watching you on Speaker View, Biff, and I just felt you were talking to me personally, and it was beautiful. And I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And to thank you.
I feel honoured.
Thank you. And thank you again, everybody in the team who have put this meeting together today and worked so hard. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart to all of you for what you bring to enable this movement to keep going and to be where we are today and then to move forward to better things in the future, we hope. And yes, and I've lost my train of thought slightly. And thank you to all of you participants, all the attendees, members who have come today and supported and stayed right to the end, even though it's been quite a long meeting. We really, really appreciate that as well. I've got I thought we would end on, I've got a YouTube clip here of a song, which I'm sure you will all know, called I Am Woman, and it's the Judith Lucy version, which it includes some quite eclectic scenes, including a bit of jelly fighting and this and that. We thought it was quite fun and sort of sums up all of the different things that women can bring. And so with that, I'm going to go onto my share screen to share that with you. And I hope that sort of sends you away feeling a bit uplifted and inspired from everything that you've heard here today. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon. And I'll say goodbye, but stay around for this. hope this is.
I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend, 'cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor. No one's ever gonna keep me down again. Oh yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I've paid the price, but look how much I've gained. If I had to, I can do anything. I am strong, strong. I am invincible, invincible. I am woman. You can bend but never break me, 'cause it only serves to make me more determined to achieve my final goal. And I come back even stronger, not a novice any longer, 'cause you've deepened the conviction in my soul. Oh yes, I'm wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Oh yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong, strong. I am invincible, invincible. I am
Bullseye! And that is one for the ladies.
I am woman, watch me grow. See me standing toe to toe. As I spread my loving arms across the land. But I'm still an embryo with a long, long way to go, until I make my brother understand. Oh yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I've gained. If I had to, I'd face anything. I am strong, strong. I am invincible, invincible. I am I am invincible. I'm strong. I am
I wished I could have had you all on. I wished I could have had you all on gallery view at the same time. I could have seen you singing along. I was singing along. I hope the rest of you were. So with that, we'll say goodbye and thank you, everybody. Heartfelt thanks to everyone, and see you all again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye, and thank you, Biff.